Hello, Miami. You're watching 305 Sports Now, your home podcast and channel for all things Miami sports related. I am Will.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me.
Hey, what's up, Miami? Thank you so much for watching and listening to 305 Sports Now. And I'm going to continue with what's been going on this past week and continue talking about our lovely Miami Dolphins. And once again, as promised, okay, I have a very special guest. You guys know him, but let me give him a very, very formal introduction, okay? He is the pregame and postgame host for the Miami Heat Radio Network. He is the executive producer of the Hawkman and Crowder Show on WQAM weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. And he also co-hosted this year's WQAM's Miami Dolphins pregame show this season, known as Game Day Uncensored. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only friend of the show, Mr. Alejandro Solana. What's up? How you doing?
I'm good, man. I think we'd all be feeling a little bit better if we were preparing for a divisional round playoff game, but as is or has been the case for 24 years now, Will,
Yes.
that's not happening. So other than that, I'm doing good.
Yeah. You know how old I was when the Miami Dolphins won their last super playoff game? I was 19. I'm 43. I
You want
was.
to know how old I was?
Were you even born?
It's a fair question. I was born in '94, so
Okay.
when they won their last playoff game, early 2000, I was 6, 5,
Wow.
5 or 6, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember that game? Because I started getting into football when I was like 7. That's like my furthest memory. No, you don't remember?
No, I don't remember at all. Yeah, I mean, I remember, I remember Jay Fiedler. I remember Wanstead being the coach, but like if I would be lying if I said, "Oh, I remember being 5 years old and this happened." Like, no, I don't remember the Marino years. Ricky Williams was like my first favorite football player when they traded for him. So, like early aughts, but probably closer to like '03, '04. Zach Thomas, Jason Taylor.
Mhm.
That's when I really started, loving and being able to, I guess, comprehend and grow into being a sports fan.
Yeah, those years, I feel as Dolphin fans, we took them for granted because the Marino years were special. Even though the Dolphins couldn't get past the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs, that was usually they always end up locking heads. Not much more different than now, but then Dolphins can never get past the Bills with the Jim Kelly years, and but so the Marino years were special. And then Zach, I mean, you got Zach and Jason Taylor when they were already a bit older, as far as football goes. I got to see them when they were in their prime. When Zach
Yeah.
Thomas went head to head with Jerome Bettis and dropped them for like a 5-yard loss, and JT was getting pick sixes and so on. I mean, those were great years to watch Dolphin football, and we just take them for granted because now we realize, man, it's been rough. It really
Even
has been.
I do remember, maybe 2006 or 2007, like around the Crowder years when,
Mhm.
or the Ronnie Brown years. I remember watching a game. Vividly remember where I was. We were at like my uncle's house, and I remember vividly watching a game where it was late in the season. I think the Dolphins were playing the Steelers. It may have been that Steelers game that ended like 3-0 or whatever. And
Okay.
they put up a graphic on the TV. Dolphins haven't made the playoffs or haven't won a playoff game since 2000. And at that point, it was probably like 5 or 6 year drought. And I vividly remember the broadcasters talking about how that'll change. Right? It's the Miami Dolphins. They're going through
Yeah.
some down years, but that'll change. And then in '08, win the division, um, or make the play. Yeah, win the division, make the playoffs with the Wildcat. And we took that for granted too,
Yeah.
because you never imagine here we are 24 years later, and what is it? When was that? Like 13 years ago, 14 years ago, that you wouldn't have won a playoff game. You've made the playoffs 3 times since 2008. Like it's crazy, man. It really is.
Yeah.
It's insane.
In the Shula years, you always knew you were gonna make the playoffs. And it's funny though because the Dolphins, and we'll get into the meat of the show, but the Dolphins, everybody talks about how Mike McDaniel, and we'll circle back to it, chokes away in December. But the only coach that I can remember that had any success in December, the last, I would say, 30 years, Alejandro, was Brian Flores. Brian Flores was the flip side. He would struggle in
Right.
September, October, and then start winning in late November. And then even the great Don Shula, late 80s, early 90s. December was the worst month for the Dolphins. The same thing with Wanstead. Jimmy Johnson had one year where I think he lost 6 straight in December, and or that time, or that's like half of a season. It was really, they finished 8-8 for the fans. They're like, what are you talking about? They finished 8-8. I think his first year, and they went through a really bad slide. It has been December has been a horrible month for Miami. So when everyone, it's Mike McDaniel can't coach in this. No, 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 no. It's like a cursed team when it comes to that month. It's just absolutely brutal. And also, let's face the NFL, a lot of teams, they're cold weather teams, so they thrive in that time and in that increment weather. So I mean, go figure. Go figure. So, anyways, that being said, so let's review the season. I'm a half glass full kind of guy in the sense that although things didn't end the way they should have ended, I do think the injuries played a very key role in why the Miami Dolphins struggled towards the end of December. I mean, what the talk online is that Tua's a system quarterback, but which I kind of tend to agree to a certain extent. He runs that system very well, though. He put up really attractive numbers this year, MVP style numbers. And last year, Teddy Bridgewater, Skylar Thompson, they were in that same system. The Dolphins struggled offensively. Tua's numbers were 624, 29 touchdowns. I didn't like the interception numbers. I thought he got a little too big play happy towards this whole season. Tyreek had another good year. Should have had 2,000 yards if it wasn't for that horse collar against Tennessee.
Yeah.
13 touchdowns, almost 1,800 yards receiving. Moser had a career year, 21 touchdowns, 18 of them rushing, 3 of them passing. So under Mike McDaniel, there has been some movement in the right direction. But how do you see the season, Alejandro?
Yeah, so it's hard because I think what and you mentioned the talk online, and I think what happens with a lot of Dolphins fans, and look, this is normal in the sense that your team loses, your team underachieves in terms of expectations that were set prior to the season and in the middle of the season when things were as high as they've probably been in 23 years, right? Expectations shift, and it's normal when you fall short of those expectations, and you don't just fall short. I mean, you fall flat on your ass. It's normal for the reaction to be certainly mixed, but the reaction to be, a heavy one where people are calling for, Tua to get out of here and McDaniel to be fired. The way I look at it is, yes, injuries played a part. There's no doubt about that. But you just mentioned your quarterback was number one in yards passing this season. He certainly had the best season of his career this season. You had a running back break the franchise record for touchdowns. You had a revelation with a rookie running back behind Raheem Mostert, who was arguably the most electrifying running back in the NFL this season, and he only played like half the games. You had 2,000-yard receivers. Tyreek Hill could have and should have broken the single season receptions record and could have become the only receiver to break 2,000 yards in a season. You had Jalen Waddle break 1,000 yards. First time in Dolphins history a receiver does it 3 straight seasons to start their career. And with all that being said, you still fell way short of expectations, and you still couldn't get over that hump of winning a playoff game. And yes, I go back to injuries. Obviously, injuries played a part. Tyreek Hill missing some time late in the season, or missing a game late in the season. Well, the Dolphins won that game. Jalen Waddle wasn't 100%. You could argue Tyreek Hill wasn't 100%. Obviously, Mostert and Achane weren't 100%. So your 4 best weapons around Tua weren't 100% going into the playoff. But really, I mean, the injury bug bit the defense in the butt harder than it did the offense, right? I mean, you start that Kansas City game with 7 of your 11 starting defensive players out. And you're picking guys up who have an AARP card to start at edge rusher to at least be backups and try to apply pressure to Patrick Mahomes. So I thought the defense, with all those injuries that they had sustained going into Buffalo and going into Kansas City, were the least of your problems. Could they have played better? For sure. But against Buffalo, I mean, the defense kept you in that game. And against Kansas City, it was what, a two possession game, a two-score game going into the fourth before they end up scoring that late touchdown and they make it 26-7. The defense, for the most part, without they could have been better, there's no doubt. They kept you in those games. What fell way short of expectations was the offense. And we talk about all those records that they had this season: top of the NFL, number one offense in the NFL, excellent rushing attack, excellent passing attack, and you still look like that against the only good teams that you played, and you look that bad in a playoff game when Waddle, Mostert, Achan, Tyreek Hill, while banged up for sure, still started around Tua. To me, that's the most concerning part, which was you accomplished all these things that look great on paper, but you weren't any closer this year compared to last year to getting over the crucial hump that they had to get over. Had they beaten Kansas City and gotten blown out again by Baltimore, I mean, we'd be having some discussions. We'd be let down. There's no doubt. But they needed to win a playoff game this year. They absolutely needed to. Tua had to stay healthy, and the Dolphins had to win a playoff game this year. You accomplished.
All right, we're having some technical difficulties right now with
Win a playoff
Alejandro.
game.
There we go. Yeah, Alejandro, you froze for about a good 3 to 4 seconds there. Can you repeat what you were stating?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, just your the two goals you set out this season, the two most important goals were what? Tua to stay upright for 17 games. You accomplished that. But probably the bigger one was to win a playoff game. And you failed. And you couldn't do it. And not only could you not do it, the most significant part of what the Dolphins were building, which was their offense, bringing in the run game coordinator, the offensive guru. I mean, it looked abysmal. Their offense looked anemic against good teams and in the last 2-3 games of the regular season, even really 4 games. I mean, they beat the Cowboys, but 22 points against a Cowboys team that now we know isn't even that good. So I would say, it was unfortunately, and I tend to agree with you. I'm a half glass full kind of guy also, because I do think this was still the most fun Dolphin season of my lifetime. But if it doesn't result in at least a playoff win or at least a competitive playoff game against an elite team and an elite quarterback, then it kind of seems like we're just spinning our wheels here and heading in the same direction that the organization has been heading in or caught in with this state of purgatory. And truthfully, that was what I felt Saturday night watching that performance from the team.
Yeah, it's just really strange because the knock on the Dolphins this season was that they pound, these horrible teams, with the exception of Tennessee, and they struggle against the playoff teams. But the way I see it is that the team didn't have like a happy medium, because regardless of the record that the teams they play, like for example the Commanders or the Giants or even the Carolina Panthers, they're still NFL. They're still an NFL team, and we've seen this year that there have been occasions where these weak teams do upset these big teams. So what I'm trying to say is that Miami pounded. I mean, you're talking about college football style numbers against teams like Denver and Carolina and the Giants and the Commanders. I mean, they really pounded them. And the interesting part about the beatings is that Mike McDaniel's offense was very creative as far as some of the play calls against these horrific teams. Against the Jets, the Jets have a good defense. The Jets were a top 10 defense this year, and they embarrassed the Jets defense this year as well. But against playoff caliber teams this past season, the Dolphins averaged only 16 points per game. So what's the deal, with the play calling in that situation? Because is Mike McDaniel? I mean, for me, in my perspective, I feel like he rolls back, the creativity a little bit when he takes on these playoff caliber teams. Am I wrong to think that, or is there something to that narrative?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, right? It's one that's worth having. I think it's fair to say that he's a second year head coach this year, who last year you mentioned the record in December, and that it's not just Mike McDaniel, but certainly Mike McDaniel, he talks all season long about, staying healthy for December. He talks all season long about meaningful December and January games. That's what it's all about. And his record in December and January is really bad. And last year, fine, they lost on the road back to back in California. They lost to the Niners. They got blown out. And then Tua plays horribly against the Chargers, and they still have a chance to win, and they don't win. And then in the following game against the Packers on Christmas Day, Tua ends up being concussed in the second half. The two worst passes I've ever seen a quarterback throw. We kind of chalk it up to, well, Tua was concussed again. And then the rest of those games, I think they lose versus the Patriots. They get that one win against the Jets to salvage their season. And then Skylar Thompson, they almost beat Buffalo and Buffalo as well. I should note that. But then Skylar Thompson loses in Buffalo in the playoffs, and we kind of chalk it up to fine. Most of those games you're without Tua, or at least Tua was banged up. So we chalk it up to that, right? Well, then this year he had a chance. Tua did, and so did Mike McDaniel, to prove that that narrative that was bestowed on the team last season, that they weren't a good team come December and January, they could turn that around. And they didn't. And I think, a lot of people, they now point to, well, the Dolphins, they were merchants of bad teams, right? They were able to put up points against the Commanders and the Jets of the world and the Patriots of the world and the Broncos. But to me, that's not a bad problem to have. Like, I didn't mind that the Dolphins lost to the Eagles on the road. I didn't mind that they got their faces bashed in against Buffalo, because, hey, if you're going to lose on the road to elite teams, to Super Bowl caliber teams, to me, that makes all the sense in the world, right? Beat up on bad teams at home. And if you are going to have and suffer losses, make sure that you're competitive in those games and that it's road teams that have Super Bowl aspirations. And hopefully that allows your team to learn and to build character and to overcome those same situations later on in the season. So early on, I wasn't really buying into they need a big win. Because to me, they beat Kansas City. We forget about all that. That narrative goes out the window. They beat a good team on the road. But the problem becomes when you're later on in the season, and not only are you not being competitive, but your play calling looks totally different than it did against even the Eagles, against any of those bad teams that you beat up on. I mean, the idea in Kansas City that you're facing a fourth down after the entire game, what were they, 0-11 at one point on third down? But whatever. Fourth down, the game's pretty much over, but the Dolphins do have one chance to at least score a touchdown, make it interesting, get an onside kick. It's 4th and 16, and they're throwing a 7-yard, 8-yard slant to Cedric Wilson, 8 yards, 9 yards short of the first down. Like, to me, that is insane. It just absolutely insane. So, yeah, I mean, play calling for sure was a massive, massive issue towards the end of the season. And it goes back to what I'm saying. I mean, it's probably fair to say that Mike McDaniel, as great as he has been, and I love Mike McDaniel, I really do. I think he's a good dude. I think he turned Tua Tagovailoa's career around. And anybody who disagrees, I mean, you're just a Tua hater.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my criticisms of Tua too. Like the limitations are obvious, and we can talk about them. But he certainly gave Tua's career a second chance at life after those first 2 years with Brian Flores. But with that being said, to me, in the final stretches of this season, and certainly against Buffalo in the second half and against Kansas City, the 6 most important quarters of his NFL coaching career to this date, he looked like somebody who was in way over his head. And that is a massive issue.
But do you think it's because he wasn't really calling plays when he was the coordinator over at San Francisco? Because one of the things I've heard from the fan base is that they say that he shouldn't be calling plays, period, because he's the head coach. And I do agree with that in theory, but he comes from a tree where the head coach calls everything. Kyle Shanahan calls everything over in San Francisco. He was a run game coordinator and the OC. So that was his job, to be a run game coordinator and an OC. So he comes to Miami and he brings that mentality of Kyle Shanahan. We're not complaining when he's putting up 70 against the Denver Broncos. But we start complaining is
Right.
when he's losing, in the playoffs, and he's losing to elite teams like Buffalo and also the Baltimore Ravens. So where are you at as far as Mike McDaniel as a play caller Is it because let me tell you, he has called good plays against good teams. His first season, they went balls to the wall against the Ravens when they were down by 25 points, and he
For
just was
sure.
bombing it all over the place. And that team beat Buffalo, one of the few wins that we've ever had against Buffalo in a long time. And of course, they almost won the playoff game last year with Skylar Thompson. I would say the defense lost them that game, over in Buffalo, in the playoffs, and also the before the season even ended. So where are we with Mike? What's going on? As far as Mike McDaniel, the play caller, is concerned, is he in over his head? Is it because he still needs to learn on the job a bit more, or what's the latter?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, he's got to get an offensive play caller." Clearly, it's not working out. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I agree with that. Truthfully, do I think? And he was asked about that, by the way, in the the postseason press conference earlier this week with Chris Greer. I believe it was David Fiones of the South Florida Sun Sentinel who asked him about the potential of him, finding a play caller just based on how things ended this season, where clearly the offense just looked like a shell of itself. And I think his answer was something along the lines of, he's not ruling anything out. And to me, like that takes a lot of maturity because he could easily stand up there and say, no, 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 I'm calling the plays. We had the number one offense in the NFL. I think we're all right there. Um, so I like the fact that he's willing to reassess. And I think when you have a loss and a season end as catastrophically as this one did, it's good to have a head coach who's willing to reassess everything. What went wrong? Let's find out what went wrong. So I like that about Mike McDaniel. I mean, I think it's easy to just sit here and say for anybody, "Oh, he's got to get an offensive play caller." Maybe, I'm not, the brightest football mind. I'm not going to pretend like I played in the NFL and I understand X's and O's the way that Mike McDaniel does, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think, Oronde Gadsden had joined us all season long, and he kept saying from the very beginning, after they lost to Buffalo, he said the Dolphins don't have a plan B. When everything is going right for them, their O line is healthy, Tua and Jalen are on the field, they're healthy, Mostert and HN are on the field, they're healthy, and Tua's able to get protection, and he's able to get the ball out within 2 to 3 seconds, and Tyreek Hill is able to beat coverage, whether it's man or zone, and everything's flowing the way it's supposed to. They look great. Everybody looks great, top to bottom, right? But when things don't go according to plan, there's no plan B. And I think we saw that second half against Buffalo. They come out in the first half, they don't necessarily look great. Tua has those turnover problems that went away for about a month of the season. Remember, like he threw a couple interceptions. Was it against the Raiders? And then the following week, he didn't throw one again until I believe
Jets game,
until
I think.
against the Jets, right?
Yeah.
So, or maybe it was after the Jets game where he threw those two, and then he said, "Hey, like I got to fix these turnover problems." And I think he went most of December without throwing an interception until that Baltimore game.
Yeah.
So he had fixed those, but then obviously they came back later in the season. When things aren't going according to plan, he has to be able to adjust. In that second half, most important half of your season against Buffalo, to have 5 possessions, and I think 4 of them end in a punt, and you give up that punt return, and they had what 47 yards of total offense or 56 yards of total offense.
Yeah, it was
That
really
to
bad.
me, it shows that he is not great at adjusting in game when everything is not going according to plan. And we saw it against the Chiefs. They're switching up their safety looks. They're trying to confuse Tua. Clearly, it worked. Whether the weather played a factor or not, hey, Patrick Mahomes was able to settle in at some point in that game and make the throws he needed to make. Um, and Tua wasn't. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm pushing for Mike McDaniel to relinquish his play calling abilities. I think he'll get better as he matures as an NFL head coach. Should it be on the table? I think everything should be on the table. Absolutely. But to me, him being the play caller as the head coach isn't why they lost. He just has to do a better job at being an in-game head coach while also calling plays, and it's all part of his maturation process as a head coach.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I didn't hear his press conference interview after, and I'm glad he said that. Again, I just think it's on the job for him because he didn't really call plays when he was over in San Francisco. It was all Kyle Shanahan. So I think that's something that he starting to bounce and learn in the process. But that Kansas City game was an absolute disaster. The Dolphins just didn't show up at all. And the weather affected the Chiefs even as well early on in the game. That's when Miami should have taken much more advantage of the Chiefs. The Chiefs got better as the game went along because, that they're just more used to it than Miami. But Tua was awful, in that game. He's known for his accuracy. He was completely inaccurate, 51% completion percentage. And one of those is only good because Tyreek Hill, kind of bailed him out when he underthrew that football.
Yeah, the
As
Dolphins Will, think about it. The Dolphins, their final 6 quarters of their season, they put 7 points up on the board.
yeah,
And in reality, the touchdown, the 7 points just came because Tyreek Hill is a freak of nature. I mean,
yeah.
Tua Tagovailoa did not throw a good ball there. I'm sorry.
No, he did not.
He underthrew Tyreek. Tyreek had single man coverage and was able to just come back for the ball, make a play, and beat the defender because he's insane. He's unbelievable. Tua didn't throw a good ball there. Like that wasn't a good drive by the Dolphins. They weren't in Buffalo, or excuse me, they weren't in Kansas City territory once. They weren't in the red zone once. I mean that's it's unacceptable in a must-win playoff game for a franchise that now has the longest NFL playoff win drought. I mean, it's unacceptable for an offense that was number 1 in the NFL. But it goes to show you again, limitations are clearly there, and whether it's head coaching, a combination of head coaching, quarterbacking, there's a lot of, you know, looming questions about the direction of this team with the current centerpieces that they have.
So I have to bring up this question: should the Miami Dolphins think about possibly parting ways with Mike McDaniel, and obviously not going to send Tua, but moving on from Tua Tagovailoa, or should they just be a little more patient and trust the process a little bit more?
So my thinking is they're going to keep Mike McDaniel as long as they keep Tua. To me, Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniel at this point are joint at the hip. And the day that Chris Greer, whether it's this offseason, which I don't think it will be, whether it's next offseason or 5 off seasons from now, whatever happens between here and then, when they decide to move on from one, they're going to decide to move on from the other. That's my thinking. That's the way I see it, because they brought in Mike McDaniel. He clearly was brought in to fix their quarterback, and he did. That's not debatable. Did he make him a top 5 quarterback? Clearly not. Can't win in the brightest light. When the lights are brightest, he can't win. Clearly, he didn't make him an elite quarterback, but he turned him into a guy that was an afterthought in the NFL. Everybody thought was Dunzo because of what Brian Flores did here. And he turned him into a really good quarterback, somebody who's capable of getting you to the playoffs. So I don't think they fire Mike McDaniel. I think he's shown too much promise, getting you to 2 consecutive playoff berths. And he brought you the funnest Dolphins season probably in my lifetime that I can remember in 24 years. And I mean, look at the statistics. I mean, they were a good football team. Again, they underachieved in a massive way. I'm not disagreeing with anybody. And I don't think being a good football team in the regular season is good enough. So I agree with that premise. But I don't think you just, you know, fire Mike McDaniel because you lost this game. You're like, that's it. You fire him. To me, he deserves at the very least another season.
I agree with you. Again, the Dolphins also did improve by 2 games. Some of the pundits thought Miami would win 10 games. They expected to make the playoffs, but they said 10 games. The Dolphins won 11. They should have won at least 12. That Tennessee
Should have won
debacle
13.
and
But
yeah, in the
yeah.
fourth quarter up by 13. Even the announcers were talking about, what Tennessee needed to do with the Dolphins. Enjoyed the division for the most part. So I like Mike. I think Mike is gonna grow more into his job, and grow more as a play caller as the season goes along. Last season, everyone complained that he abandoned the run way too early. This past season, we see Mostert's numbers. We saw a Chan's numbers. They would have been a lot higher if a Chan doesn't get hurt, either.
Yeah,
So,
but he probably did, some of the same issues from last year. So the one thing that stood out to me from last season that was a major flaw in Mike McDaniel was penalties throughout the game,
mhm.
procedure penalties, movement penalties. guys not knowing where they're supposed to be lining up. We saw a lot of that last year, and he was implementing a very difficult offense to understand. And the way that the players describe it, Omar Kelly always brings this up. The way that the players describe it is like it's learning a totally new language. And this year, you saw that get cleared up a ton early on in the season, but towards the back half of the season, you saw a lot of that, right? Ineligible man downfield was
Yeah.
the first play of the Dolphins game in the playoffs. You get an ineligible man downfield. You saw some procedure penalties. You saw your best tackle in Tron Armstead um, move offside in or false start rather, be called for false start. So you saw a lot of that later in the season as well. So when I'm just doing overall grades, what McDaniel fixed in terms of what was affecting him in his first season to the second season in December and January, he looked like a lot of those same flaws were kind of being being rehashed once again in critical moments of the season, which to me is concerning because you would expect from year one to year two a lot of those things to kind of be forgotten. But you saw a lot of those issues come up again late in the season.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. As far as the penalties go, we did see an increase of penalties in the month of December. But and the run was abandoned, I would say, the last few
For
games of the
sure.
season as well,
For
especially
sure.
against Kansas City. I thought they could have used Moser a little bit more. But as a whole, I'm looking at the season as a whole comparable to last season. The Dolphins did run the ball more, as far as an offense. That's what pretty much what I'm
Yeah,
trying to say. But yeah, the
for sure.
penalty wise, the Dolphins had issues. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, I think he deserves another season or two to at least, implement his offense to get, the personnel he needs to get to the right direction. Tua's a different animal, and your buddy the Big O, for his hot take, he's hit or miss with me, in terms of his analysis, but I thought he was spot on when he said Tua plays his fifth year option. He doesn't get extended unless he could prove it in this upcoming season. Where are you at as far as that goes? Do you think that should be the case, or should the Dolphins just maybe think about, since it's a good quarterback class, maybe making some moves to get, potentially Tua's replacement in the offseason?
So, if you could tell me, hey, we're gonna move on from Tua and we're gonna get Patrick Mahomes, or we're gonna move on from Tua and we're gonna get I don't know who's another elite quarterback. Well, Lamar last year would have been the guy, but we're gonna get the Mahomes of the worlds, right? Like a major upgrade. I'd say 100%. Don't even think about it. But that's not the case. Like you're not getting Joe Burrow. You're not getting CJ Stroud, who looks like he's already surpassed Tua. You're not getting whoever. I mean, name me an elite quarterback. You're not getting those guys. So throw that out the window. The idea that they're going to replace Tua this offseason, if you're a Dolphins fan and you don't think Tua Tagovailoa can carry you and be an elite quarterback and win you a playoff game or a Super Bowl, I'm not so certain that I disagree with you, but you have to get it in your mind that he will be your starting quarterback next season, barring injury. With that being said, I agree. You said Big O said they should make him play on the fifth year option.
Yeah.
Shout out to my old friend, Big O. I agree. In a perfect world, you bring Tua back, you say, hey, you're gonna make what's he gonna make on his fifth year? 22, $23 million, whatever. It's somewhere in that ballpark. You're gonna make $23 million next year. We want to extend you. We want to make you our franchise quarterback for years to come. We believe in you, but you got to prove it to us that you can win us a playoff game. And we're going to make you play on this fifth year option. And in a perfect world, Tua says, hey, let's go. The same way Christian Wilkins did, right? I'll bet on myself. I'll come here. I'll show you guys I can be that guy. I'll show you guys that my deficiencies in December, I can overcome them. I'll show you guys on my fifth year option that you made a mistake not giving me this extension earlier, right? That's in a perfect world. Will, if I'm Tua, I'm speaking strictly as Tua, or if I'm Tua's representation or his camp, his agent, his family, I'm not playing on that fifth year option. Are you? With my injury history and with what I should be making on the open market, just based on my statistics, I'm not playing on that fifth year option. And I'm your starting quarterback. I'm the difference between you looking like the team that was led by Skylar Thompson or Teddy Bridgewater, which is bad. We don't want to go back to that. Or looking like the number one offense in the league, even if it is against bad teams. You need me, right? So if I'm Tua, I'm not playing on that 5th-year option. I'll sit out. Find me until you get me paid, or I'll sit out for a whole year and somebody next year will give me money, or I'll make it real messy in the media, trade me, whatever it takes to get out of here. Somebody in the NFL will pay Tua at the very least what Daniel Jones got from the New York Giants, at the very least. If Daniel Jones got what, 4 years, 160 million,
Yeah.
90 million guaranteed, Tua's going to get at the very least that contract, but probably more. He's clearly better than Daniel Jones. I think all of us would agree with that. So that's why I think this is a very tricky situation for Miami, because if they try to get Tua to take a team friendly deal, which could happen, they could express their cap issues. They're 42 million above the cap. Well, they can get rid of Agba. They can get rid of Jerome Baker. That takes them down to like 23. And, the cap in the NFL, you can maneuver it. But you pay big time money to a quarterback, and filling out your roster the way that they were able to do this past offseason gets a lot more tricky when you owe your quarterback, 35% of your cap. And we saw that, right? With Tom Brady, consistently took team friendly deals, and the Patriots were able to kind of maneuver their way around paying him a lot of money. But if I'm Tua, why would I do that? I'm showing you the statistics, right? I'm number one in passing yards. You had the number one offense with me clearly leading it. You had 2,000-yard receivers. Like, it's me. Hello, it's me. Right? So this could get tricky for Miami. It really can. I can't imagine Tua being the guy that is going to make it messy, who's going to come into camp and be a nuisance and, demand a trade. Like, I don't imagine Tua being in that situation, because I think he's too nice of a guy. I think his relationship with Mike McDaniel is really rock solid. I think they both believe in each other. They both have a ton of respect for each other. And like I told you, I think both of them are kind of conjoined at the hip right now. But if I was Tua, that's how I would handle it. Joe Burrow in my draft class got paid. Jordan Love, he didn't get, the Daniel Jones contract, but they made a commitment to him long term. Justin Herbert, they made a commitment to him long term. I'm the only guy in my draft class that hasn't gotten that commitment. And I took you to the playoffs 2 years in a row, and I've improved in consecutive years. I showed you I can stay healthy, which is what you wanted to see from me. And you're going to make me plan a 5th-year contract and risk my future? Nope. I'm not doing it. So again, I'm not saying that I agree with that. I'm just saying if I was Tua, the person, that's how I would approach this. Pay me. I deserve it. And statistically speaking, and just based on precedent for what quarterbacks have gotten, based on far less production, he's probably right to demand it.
Well, my question to you is, I'm not in those meetings, and I don't know what's going on. What the speech between Chris Greer and Tua, or Stephen Ross and Tua. But what I've heard, and is that the possibility, one of the reasons why they didn't extend Christian Wilkins, and even though they gave him offer sheets, is because his sack totals weren't of a high caliber. He far exceeded that expectation. He played out his contract with the Dolphins. As far as Tua goes, do you think Tua takes that same approach and is like, listen, I could win you a playoff game, and if he does win a playoff game, he could pretty much tell the Dolphins, now you're really going to pay me?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. That's what I think the Dolphins are going to want to do, because I don't think they're going to want to tie themselves to somebody who, again, I mean, the way that the season ended, let's face it, man, a lot of that blame, well, we can blame Mike McDaniel for play calling and or lack thereof. Man, a lot of that blame just comes down to the quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa has not proven that when the lights are brightest, he'll elevate his game. He hasn't. He was great this season against mediocre teams. Excellent phenomenal. Best in the league this season against mediocre teams. But in December, when you need your quarterback, that game-winning drive, you're down 4, you're down 7, you're down 3, whatever the case may be, you need points. He has the Cowboys drive. He did it one time to clinch a playoff spot. That was awesome. But you gotta be able to win a playoff game. You gotta be able to clinch your division to avoid blowing a 3-game division lead. Um, and he hasn't proven it. So if I'm Chris Greer, I want him to play on that 5th-year option. Like that to me is what I would want. Hey, go prove it. 23 million or whatever it is, 21. I forget. That's that's a lot of money for a quarterback. And um, we want you to play on that and come back and you prove to us that you can win a playoff game and we'll make that long-term commitment. But for the reasons I told you before, I don't see why Tua would do it. If he does, great. That's a huge plus for the Dolphins. Run it back one more season. Hope he can stay healthy. Hope Mike McDaniel can improve his play calling abilities. Hope they can figure out a way to get Tua, in better situations late in the season. Hope that they can win a playoff game. And if they do, great. But Will, you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, why would he do that? Why would he risk his future? Why would he risk getting 90 million, 100 million guaranteed because the Dolphins don't want to make that commitment to him? Somebody else will.
Yeah. No, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, like yourself, I don't see that happening. I think Tua plays out his 5th year and tries to stick it to the Dolphins, like with by winning a playoff game. I do think he does that this year. They said he has improved, but I just don't see him sitting out and holding out and telling the team pay me or
Me neither. Me neither. I'm with you, right? Like I think he's too nice of a guy, but I think there's a difference between somebody who is a nice guy and then somebody who is sitting at a table with an agent who's advising him and they're talking about his money and his kids money,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you sign a $180 million contract, 90 million guaranteed. You just set up 3 generations of Tunga Vailoas. So again, I hope my hope is that he comes back in the 5th year, like you say. He has he's smiling. Hey, I'm gonna prove myself. Let's go win a playoff game, and I hope he does it. I really do. I like Tua. I really do. We can talk about limitations, and he's uh I think Chris Cody from the Levitard show was DMing me today. He's like, the guy has cement feet or whatever. Um, and he's right. He does. Like when when the pocket collapses, he's not great at getting out. He's not very mobile. We know he doesn't want to get hit. He's going to go down. And in this day and age in the NFL, you have to be able to make a play with your feet. You have to be able to roll out of the pocket, right? I mean, look at all the best quarterbacks. Josh Allen. I mean, he gave the Dolphins 4 possessions in that first half. And in the
Yeah.
second half, how do you win the game? With his feet.
Yeah.
3rd and 16, whatever it was. He was able to get it with his feet. Like in this day and age, the best quarterbacks in the NFL are able to do that, and Tua's not. So, to me, that's a huge issue. And I think there's a difference between being a nice guy, being a massive fan favorite, being somebody who's always been extremely respectful of everybody and speaks highly of everybody, and he says he's offline and all that stuff, and then sitting at a table and somebody's trying to mess with your money. And we'll see. I'm not accusing Tua of being a snob. I'm just if I was in that situation, I know what I would do. I'd sit there with a piece of paper with my stats and say, "Bro, look at what Daniel Jones did. Look what I did. Look how much he got paid. Why wouldn't I be getting paid the same amount of money, right? Why wouldn't I set up my future and my family's future and my grandchildren's future right now when I deserve it?" But I'm with you. I hope the Dolphins can convince him, hey, come play on that 5th year, because that's what would be best for this organization long term. Because if he's not the guy and we find out next year they haven't committed $200 million to him or whatever the money would, whatever the final transaction would be, and for sure by next year. By next year, you would know for sure, 100% sure. If he gets healthy, well, if he stays healthy and they still don't win a playoff game, you would know for sure by next year.
I totally agree with you. I think that I think that's going to end up playing out is that he does play out his 5th year. I don't think he'll hold out. Unless he listens to the agent doesn't want to go that route. But I just don't see him holding out. I think that he's going to play his 5th year, and I think he's going to put up massive numbers again. Because
Yeah.
it's in his favor. But he's got to win the big one. He's got to win the that playoff game.
Yeah,
He has to. But he also has to not make bad decisions with the football either. I mean,
for
that's
sure.
I think this season, from my perspective, he was way too big play happy. Lots of difficult throws for Tyreek Hill to catch, as well. So I think that he needs to use the intermediate route a bit more, and look for if there's a little bit of separation or check downs. He should be able to do that a bit more and not focus so much on hitting that 30, 35 yard, 40-yard bomb to Tyreek or even Jalen Waddle as well. I think he needs to tone that down a little bit.
So enticing though, right? You got Tyreek just sprinting down the field. I mean, how could you not throw it to him? But I think you bring up a fair criticism of what of to me one of the issues with the Dolphins offense. It goes back to what Aronde Gadsden was saying. There's no plan B. I
Hmm.
mean, the Dolphins offense this year truly was four guys: Mostert, Achan in the backfield,
Hmm.
and then Tua and Waddle. That's it. River Craycraft didn't do anything this year. I know he was hurt a little bit. Cedric Wilson towards the end of the season had some quality games. So I'll give Cedric Wilson, but in most of those games, Jalen Waddle was banged up. One of those games, Tyreek was banged up. Um, Chosen Anderson, other than the one touchdown against Denver from Mike White, afterthought. Braxton Berrios, excellent in special teams, and you and I both love Braxton because he's a Cane,
Yeah.
but he wasn't a great receiver for the Dolphins this year. I mean, he had a couple catches here and there, but he didn't make any big plays as a receiver. Chase Claypool was a total bust. His only two opportunities, he dropped an end zone versus Baltimore in the end zone, a touchdown. He dropped a touchdown in the end zone, and then a ball he had, and then most important player of the season, they go to him and he runs a lazy ass route, and it results in a game clinching interception for Buffalo. So he was a bust. Um, so, I mean, you had four guys on your offense. And when you weren't able to get those four guys the ball, Dolphins couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything. That's a massive flaw. Massive, massive flaw, especially if you have a guy like Waddle who has, a bit of an injury history. I don't want to call him injury prone because I don't know if, X injury correlates to the other one that he had, or if he just got unlucky and he got banged up and it is what it is. It's the National Football League. You're going to miss games. But he certainly has a pretty deep injury history at this point through 3 seasons. You got to have other ways to get other guys the ball to make impactful plays, especially late in the season. And the Dolphins weren't able to.
But you think that just that Tua just throw those guys, because I think on several occasions he would throw to Tyreek in double coverage, and which led to some picks. And Durham Smythe might have been open on some of those occasions. Would have been the safer pass. That's why I say that he got a little too big play happy because
Yeah.
he has Tyreek. So I mean, like, because Braxton Berrios could get separation. He's also one of the smartest wide receivers on that field. He will find, especially if you play zone, he will find a space in the zone where he can get the football. So do you think Tua just decide, one read, go to Tyreek, second read, oh, Waddle, 20, 25 yards, instead of like, okay, where's my security blanket?
Probably sometimes. I know a lot of people are criticizing him, for just being a guy that can't go through his progressions. He has one read every play. He's going to that first read every time. Um, again, I'm not Brian Boldinger. I don't break down film that way. I don't know if that's accurate or if it's just something people are criticizing him for. I think it's a much more deeper conversation than to just put a blanket statement over and say Tua only looks at the first read and never ever looks at anybody else. I don't know. I don't think that's true. Does he maybe some of those interceptions that he threw, was that accurate? Probably, right? I mean, he's looking at Tyreek sprinting down the field. He feels pressure. He just flings it to his guy. But I would also argue, hey, you have Tyreek Hill. Like sometimes you are going to take chances, right? That you wouldn't with somebody else. But going back to your point about Durham Smythe, if you and I do another pod where we talk about the offseason, to me, a legitimate, and I love Durham Smythe. I'm a Smythe stan, but he's a good pass blocking and run blocking tight end, and he can step out, catch some good passes for you. But to me, the Dolphins have to go and either draft or find a legitimate tight end,
I
somebody
agree.
who can who can
Absolutely.
be who can be impactful. Let's get Mike Gesicki and let's get Durham Smythe in a lab and just combine them. And that's what we, because you look at Shanahan's offense, and I mean, a tight end is massive in that offense, right? Um, the Dolphins need something similar so that they can have that security blanket, as you just mentioned, but also somebody that's not just a security blanket, somebody that they're running plays for, drawing up plays for to go out and make big plays, especially in the red zone, man. Like, to me, if I see one more fade to Tyreek Hill in the red zone on 4th and 1 or whatever it was, 3rd and goal, 2nd and goal, I'm gonna lose my effing mind. Like, get a big mother bleeper in there to catch some touchdowns in the back of the end zone because you need it.
Yeah, hey, listen, I wanted the Dolphins to draft Brevin Jordan, and then they went with Hunter Long. How did that work out for you? Okay.
Jeez, jeez.
Guys, you had him in your own backyard, and he catches a monster touchdown pass
Hey,
in a playoff game. And Hunter Long I don't know where he's at right now, so I'm not that mean, so I'm not gonna say anything bad.
hey,
But
hey,
it's the
hey,
truth.
Dolphins fans. You ever find yourself in a room with Jimmy Cephalo, who's the radio play-by-play voice for the Miami Dolphins? You ever find yourself in a room with Jimmy Cephalo? Just ask him, hey, Seth, what do you think about Hunter Long? You're welcome. You find yourself in that situation, ask him about Hunter Long, and you'll get a good couple minutes of content.
If I ever see him at a Channel 10 function when I hang out with my sister, I'll ask him.
Ask him
So
about
maybe
Hunter Long. Yeah.
ask him what he thinks of Hunter Long.
Mhm.
Alejandro, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you. Now we went over to his contract and so on, and the nuance of it, and what we possibly may want the Dolphins to do as far as picking up a tight end. And I think we do need a George Kittle on this football team. But
Right.
what do you expect in the offseason? Like, what's next for Miami? We lose against Kansas City. They look horrible. Offense was stagnant. What's next for Miami in the offseason?
It's probably figure out, to me, number one is figure out the Tua situation. You don't want that hanging over this team going into training camp, right? So Chris Greer, Tua, and his team have to sit down and they have to figure it out. Hey, are you willing to play on the 5th year option? If he is, perfect. Make that public. Tua's going to play on the 5th year option. You move forward. If he's not, then you got to figure it out right away. You're going to see a lot of people talk about Justin Fields. You're going to see a lot of people talk about Russell Wilson. And you're going to see a lot of people talk about whoever, Geno Smith, if he becomes available. I mean, I'm just spitballing names, but, I'm sure you've seen Justin Fields, Russell Wilson are the two biggest QB names right now that people are talking about for Miami. Miss me with the Russell Wilson nonsense. I can't even fathom. You don't want to pay Tua, but you're going to pay Russell Wilson at 36, 37 years old, whatever the hell he is. Justin Fields is one that I find interesting. I'm not saying I'd want the Dolphins to go get him, but he is mobile. Certainly needs a change of scenery because the Bears are probably going to draft a quarterback, whether it's Caleb Williams or somebody else. It's interesting. I wouldn't do it. I'd stick with Tua one more year, but I think it's at least worth having the conversation. So you want those conversations to go away if you're Chris Greer, Mike McDaniel, Tua, Dolphins front office. You want those quarterback questions to go away. You hammer out the Tua situation first and foremost. Next week, you sit down with them. What do you want? Would you consider playing on the 5th year? These are this is what we're thinking. What are you thinking? And you figure it out. And then once you do that, you move forward. Like I mentioned, they're 42.5, 43 million above the cap right now. The NFL cap is kind of a joke. The Dolphins can maneuver it. Big questions are Jerome Baker. Will he be back? He just had season-ending, was it wrist or hand surgery?
The surgery.
Yeah. Are the Dolphins going to pay him what he's going to want? Probably not, right? So Jerome Baker, we love you, forever playing with a broken wrist in that KC game. Jerome Baker, Dolphins lifer, but for that money, probably not bringing you back. Emmanuel Ogbah, Vic Fangio wants nothing to do with you later, so you clear that money off the books. Xavier Howard cleaning out his locker the other day on Monday kind of sounded like he knows what's inevitably coming between him and the Dolphins, which is a divorce. Love you. Dolphins lifer. You could argue his numbers should be retired. I'm not saying it should. I don't know. We'd have to look at the numbers. You could argue it, though. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of holes that you have to fill, right? Christian Wilkins.
Yeah.
You're going to pay him. And if you do pay him, don't forget, you have Javon Holland, Jalen Waddle. You have a lot of guys you have to pay in the future coming up. Jalen Phillips. And let's not forget, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, they're probably not going to be back till what? October at the very earliest. So your two arguably biggest parts of your defense, those two edge rushers, especially in Vic Fangio's system, you're not going to have them. Guys that you're paying a lot of money, or I guess Bradley Chubb, you're paying a lot of money. Not going to have them till midway through next season, or maybe a little bit earlier at the earliest. And are they going to be the same guy coming off of an Achilles and a torn ACL? Probably not right away. A lot of questions, man. A lot of questions for this Dolphins team, which is why it sucks that they lost to the Chiefs, because you feel a lot better going into next season with one playoff win at the very least, right? And your season not ending the way it did, not just losing in the playoffs, but just looking like a shell of what you look like in the last 3 games of the season. And truthfully, just pooping yourself in the final 3 games of the season, limping in with all the injuries. A lot of questions that that are going to have to be answered. And again, I'm not too concerned about the cap. I think they'll figure it out. But if they do pay Christian, if they do pay Tua, those are things you have to think about moving forward, right? Because you're going to want to pay JP for sure. We love JP down here. Hopefully he comes back healthy. You're going to want to pay Waddle. You don't want to lose Waddle. You're going to want to pay Javon Holland, I think. I love Javon. So, if X leaves, Vic Fangio's system is predicated on a 4-man pass rush with 2 elite edge rushers and 2 dominant corners.
Mm-hmm.
Now with X gone, I mean, you have Ramsey on one side. Can't come back here with Kader Kohu and Nick Needham. You can't. So who's going to fill Xavier Howard's shoes? You're going to have to go find somebody, whether it's a draft. You drafted Cam Smith. Vic Fangio doesn't even want to look at him in the hallway. So, bro, I mean, again, I like being a half glass full guy. It's bleak right now. It is. I'm not saying the Dolphins are going to suck next year, but the idea that, hey, they'll be right back where they were this year, 11 and whatever, and they just have to figure out how to win close games. I don't know. I don't know if that's the case right now, as we're talking on, mid-January of 2024. There's a lot of questions going into this offseason about this team.
Yeah, that's what makes the offseason fun, and I thank you so much for your perspective and your insight, especially since, although you're not directly, with the team, you
Not
have Channing
anymore.
Crowder. I know, not anymore, but you have Javon Holland that gives you some insight, and also Channing Crowder as well from a player's perspective. You do, like I said, you do great work on WQAM as well as the Heat. But Alejandro, before we let you go, can you please let everybody know and remind everybody once again where they can find you?
Yeah, man. Heat broadcasts on WQAM or along the Miami Heat radio network. I think it'd be really cool if you listen to our post-game show. Me and Tommy Tig, who's a radio legend, we do the pregame, we do the halftime, and we do the post-game show. So if you're going to the stadium, a lot of Heat fans, we'll turn on 560, listen to us, get you ready for tip-off. And after the game, you want to hear Coach's press conference, you want to hear some reaction after the game to what happened. He'd have been winning. Thank you, Pat Riley, for keeping us in the win column while the Dolphins continue to shatter our dreams. You can find me there, and then 2 to 6 every day, Hochman and Crowder on WQAM. We post a podcast as well, Hochman and Crowder Show. And if you like the Dolphins and you like Miami or South Florida sports, but you also just like to laugh and you don't take things so serious, that's the show for you. Trust me.
Yeah, thank you so much once again. Again, you do great work. I love listening to Hochman and Crowder. You do very good work on the Heat pre and post game show as well, and you do great work as well. You and Omar Kelly and Brenda Tillman covering the Dolphins this year as well. During before the games started as well over at WQAM. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you heard, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to 305 Sports Now. Once again, for Alejandro Solana, I am Will. Stay safe. God bless. See you soon. Fins up, guys. It's gonna be a long off season. Bye, everybody.